It was a bright, sunny Saturday morning in a quiet little place called Oakwood Lane. The sun was shining high in the sky, making everything look happy and warm. Little birds were chirping in the trees, hopping from branch to branch like they were playing a game. The grass on everyone's lawns was still wet from the night, sparkling like tiny diamonds in the light. It was the kind of morning where you just want to sit outside and enjoy everything. And that's exactly what I was doing, sitting on my porch with a big smile, watching my dog, Rusty, do his favorite thing in the whole world. Rusty is my golden retriever. He's big, fluffy, and kind of goofy. He's got this golden fur that shines like the sun, and his tail wags so fast it looks like a fan spinning round and round. That morning, Rusty was running around our yard, barking loud and proud at some squirrels. Those little furry critters were darting up trees and across the grass, and Rusty thought they were his best friends or maybe his worst enemies. I'm not sure which. He'd bark, woof, 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 like he was telling them, "Hey, you squirrels owe me something. Give it back." It was so funny to watch. I laughed every time he did it. My name's Jake, by the way. I'm just a regular guy who lives in this little neighborhood. I'm not super tall or super short. I've got brown hair and I like wearing comfy shirts and sneakers. I'm not a superhero or anything fancy, just a guy who likes hanging out with his dog. Rusty's my buddy, my pal, my best friend. He thinks he's the king of Oakwood Lane, and honestly, I kind of agree with him. He's got this big, happy bark that echoes down the street, and most people around here love it. When Rusty barks, kids giggle, old ladies wave from their windows, and even the mailman gives him a big grin. Everyone knows Rusty's bark, it's like the sound of our little world being happy. Well, almost everyone likes it. There's one person who doesn't. Her name is Karen. Oh boy, Karen is something else. She's not just any neighbor, she's the boss of the HOA. That stands for Homeowners Association. If you don't know what that is, it's like a club for people who own houses here. They make rules to keep everything nice and neat. Sounds good, right? Except Karen takes it way too far. She's like the queen of rules, and she loves telling everyone what to do. Karen's not super old, but she acts like she's in charge of the whole planet. She's got short, blonde hair that's always perfect, and she wears these big sunglasses that make her look like a movie star. But she's not nice like a movie star. Nope. She's always walking around with a clipboard in her hands, writing stuff down and pointing at things she doesn't like. "Your grass is too long," she'd yell at Mr. Thompson next door. "No bicycles on the sidewalk," she'd snap at little Timmy down the street. And one time, she told Mrs. Lopez, "No loud noises after 8 p.m., or I'll write you a ticket." A ticket? Can you believe that? It's like she thinks she's the police or something. Everyone in Oakwood Lane knows Karen. When she walks by, people roll their eyes and whisper to each other. "There goes Karen again," they'd say. "What's she mad about now?" Nobody really likes her, but nobody messes with her either. She's got this way of glaring at you that makes you feel small, like you're a kid who got caught sneaking a cookie. And that clipboard? It's her weapon. She writes down every little thing you do wrong, and then she sends you a letter saying you owe money for breaking her rules. It's crazy. I mean, who made her the boss of everything? But here's the thing, that sunny Saturday morning, Karen was about to find out she wasn't as powerful as she thought. Something big was coming, and she had no idea. Not a single clue. It was going to be one of those days where everything flips upside down, and the person who thinks they're on top ends up way, way down. I didn't know it yet either, but I could feel something funny in the air. Like when you're about to open a present and you don't know what's inside, but you just know it's going to be good. Let me tell you more about that morning so you can picture it. My house is a little blue one with a white fence around the yard. It's not super big, but it's cozy. The porch is my favorite spot. It's got a big rocking chair where I sit with my coffee, and there's a little table next to it for my mug. That morning, the coffee smelled so good, like warm, yummy chocolate mixed with something sweet. I took a sip and watched Rusty chase those squirrels. He'd run to the big oak tree in our yard, bark a bunch, then run back to me like he was saying, "Jake, did you see that? I almost got him." I'd laugh and say, "Good try, buddy." He's so silly, but he makes every day better. Oakwood Lane is a pretty street. It's got houses all in a row, each one different. Some are yellow, some are green, some have flowers growing in front. There's a sidewalk that runs along the road, and kids ride their bikes there all the time. At the end of the street, there's a little park with swings and a slide. It's a happy place, a place where people say hi to each other and dogs play in the yards. That's why Rusty fits right in. He's loud and happy, just like the neighborhood. But Karen? She doesn't fit. She's like a storm cloud on a sunny day. She lives 3 houses down from me in a big white house with perfect bushes and a shiny mailbox. Everything about her house is perfect, like it's trying to show off. She's always out front, checking on things, making sure nobody messes up her idea of how things should be. And that morning, when Rusty started barking, I knew she'd hear it. I knew she'd come stomping over. It happens every time. Sure enough, I was right. Rusty was in the middle of a big woof. Woof, when I saw her door fly open. There she was, Karen, the queen of Oakwood Lane, ready to ruin my morning. She stepped out onto her porch, her arms crossed, her face already turning pink like she was mad before she even said a word. She stared at Rusty, then at me, and I could tell she was about to start yelling. I took another sip of my coffee and thought, here we go again. But what I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this wasn't going to be a normal Karen moment. This wasn't just about Rusty barking or me sitting there laughing. This was the start of something way bigger, something that would make everyone in Oakwood Lane talk for weeks. Karen thought she was in control, but she was about to find out she wasn't. Not today. Not even a little bit. So, let me ask you something before we keep going. What would you do if someone called the cops on your dog just because he was barking? Would you laugh? Would you get mad? Would you try to explain that dogs bark because, well, they're dogs? Think about it, and stick around, because this story's about to get really, really good. Okay, let's keep building this picture. I want you to feel like you're right there with me on that porch, watching it all happen. That morning was so nice, I can still remember every little thing about it. The air smelled fresh, like grass and flowers mixed together. There was a tiny breeze blowing, just enough to make the leaves on the trees wiggle a little. The sun was warm on my face, and my coffee mug was warm in my hands. It was one of those perfect moments where you think, man, life is pretty great. Rusty was having the time of his life. He's not a mean dog, not even close. He's the kind of dog who'd lick your face instead of bite you. One time, a raccoon got into our trash can, and Rusty just sat there wagging his tail like, hey, new friend. He's big, sure, but he's a softie. That's why I love him so much. He's got these big brown eyes that look at you like he understands everything you say. And when he barks, it's not scary, it's happy. It's like he's saying, look at me, world. I'm here, and I'm excited. The squirrels he was chasing that morning were fast little guys. They'd zoom up the oak tree, their tiny feet scratching the bark, then peek down at Rusty like they were teasing him. Can't catch us, they seemed to say. Rusty would jump up, his front paws hitting the tree, and bark even louder. Woof. Woof. I'll get you next time. It was a game they played almost every day, and I never got tired of watching it. It's like Rusty and the squirrels had their own little show, and I was the audience. Most people on Oakwood Lane love Rusty's show. Mr. Thompson, the old guy next door, always chuckles when he hears the barks. That dog's got spirit, he'd say, leaning on his cane. Little Timmy, who lives across the street, sometimes runs over with his mom to pet Rusty. He's so loud and cool. Timmy says, giggling as Rusty licks his hands. Even Mrs. Lopez, who's super quiet and shy, smiles from her porch when Rusty's out there being his goofy self. It's like he brings everyone together, you know? He's the heart of our street. But Karen? Oh no. Karen doesn't think Rusty's the heart of anything. To her, he's a problem. A big, loud, furry problem. She's been mad about his barking since the day I moved in. Dogs should be quiet, she told me once, her clipboard waving in the air. This is a peaceful neighborhood, Jake. I just nodded and said, sure, Karen, but inside I was thinking, lady, dogs bark. That's what they do. She didn't care, though. She'd glare at Rusty every time he made a sound, like he was breaking some big, important law. That's why I wasn't surprised when her door opened that morning. I knew she'd heard Rusty. I knew she'd come out ready to fight. It's what she does. She loves being the boss, loves telling people they're wrong. And me? I'm her favorite target. Maybe because I don't argue back. I just sit there, sip my coffee, and let her yell. It's easier that way. Plus, Rusty doesn't care what she thinks, he's too busy having fun. So there she was, standing on her porch, staring at us. Her house looked perfect, like always. The bushes were trimmed into little squares, the grass was so green it almost glowed, and her mailbox shone like someone polished it every day. She had on a bright pink robe that morning, tied tight around her waist, and her blonde hair was puffed up like she'd just brushed it 100 times. She looked ready to march over and give me a lecture. And that's exactly what she did. She started walking down her steps, her slippers slapping the ground. Slap, slap, slap. Each step sounded like she was madder than the last one. Rusty didn't notice her at first, he was too busy barking at a squirrel that had jumped to the next tree. Woof. Woof, he went, his tail wagging like crazy. I watched him, smiling, but then I heard her voice cut through the air like a knife. Jake, she yelled. Jake, that dog is too loud again. I turned my head slow, real slow, and looked at her. She was halfway across her yard now, coming toward my fence. Her face was pink, her eyes were narrow, and her hands were on her hips. She looked like a volcano about to blow up. Do something about that barking, she shouted. It's ruining my morning. I leaned back in my rocking chair and took a big sip of coffee. Morning, Karen, I said, nice and calm. Rusty's just playing. He's a dog. Dogs bark. Simple, right? I thought maybe she'd get it this time. Maybe she'd see that Rusty wasn't hurting anyone, just having fun. But nope. Not Karen. She doesn't listen to simple. She stopped at my fence, glaring over it like she could scare Rusty quiet with her eyes. I don't care if he's a dog, she snapped. He's too loud, and I'm tired of it. This is a peaceful street, Jake. Peaceful. And your dog is wrecking it. Her voice was sharp, like she was trying to poke me with her words. I just shrugged. He's not wrecking anything, I said. He's happy. Maybe you should try being happy too. Big mistake. That made her face go from pink to red. Bright red, like a stop sign. Happy, she screeched. I'll show you happy. I'm calling the cops. Right now. She pulled her phone out of her robe pocket and held it up like it was a magic wand. I'm done with this noise, Jake. Done. I raised an eyebrow. The cops? For a barking dog? Really? Karen, I said, still calm, it's just Rusty. He's not a monster. Chill out. But she wasn't chilling. Not even a little. She started tapping on her phone, muttering to herself. Yes, hello, police. I need you here now, she said into it. There's a disturbance on Oakwood Lane. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A disturbance? Rusty. The dog who rolls over for belly rubs from strangers. This was nuts. But Karen was serious. She kept talking into her phone, waving her other hand around like she was directing traffic. Hurry up, she said. It's an emergency. An emergency. Wow. I looked at Rusty, who was now sitting by the tree, panting and wagging his tail. He didn't look like an emergency to me. He looked like a big, happy fluff ball. But Karen? She was acting like he was a wild bear tearing up the street. It was so ridiculous, I almost spilled my coffee from laughing. And that's when I started to wonder, why was she so mad about this? Why did she hate Rusty's barking so much? It's not like he barked all night or anything. It was just a few woofs in the morning. What was her deal? I didn't have an answer yet, but I had a feeling something was off. Something about Karen, about this whole thing, didn't feel normal. What I didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this wasn't just about Rusty. This wasn't just Karen being her usual grumpy self. This was the start of something wild, something that would flip Oakwood Lane upside down. Karen thought she was the queen, thought she could boss me and Rusty around like always. But today? Today was different. Today, she was about to get a big surprise. So here's my question for you again, what would you do if someone called the cops on your dog just for barking? Would you argue? Would you laugh? Would you pet your dog and tell them they're awesome no matter what? Let me know what you think, because this story's just getting started, and trust me, you're gonna want to hear what happens next. It all started with a squirrel. Yep, just one little squirrel, scampering across Karen's perfect lawn like it didn't know it was about to start a big mess. The sun was shining bright that Saturday morning, and I was sitting on my porch, rocking back and forth in my favorite chair. My coffee was warm in my hands, and I was watching my dog, Rusty, have the best time ever. Rusty's a big, fluffy golden retriever with a tail that wags so fast it's like a windshield wiper on a car going zoom. He's my best buddy, and he loves chasing squirrels more than anything. So there he was, standing in our yard, when that squirrel darted out from behind a bush. It zoomed across Karen's lawn, her super neat, super green lawn that looks like it's from a picture book. The squirrel's tiny feet barely touched the grass, but Rusty saw it right away. His ears perked up, his eyes got big, and then boom, he let out the loudest bark you ever heard. Woof! Woof! He shouted, his voice bouncing off the houses. His tail was whipping back and forth, like he was so excited he couldn't stand still. He took off running, his paws thumping the ground, chasing that squirrel like it stole his favorite toy. I was on the porch, holding my coffee mug, and I couldn't help but laugh. Rusty's barks are so big and goofy, they make me smile every time. Woof! Woof! He kept going, jumping around like he was in a race. The squirrel zigzagged across Karen's yard, then zipped up a tree on the other side. Rusty stopped at the edge of my fence, barking up at it like he was saying, "Come back down here, you little sneak." It was hilarious. I took a sip of my coffee, yum, it tasted like warm chocolate, and leaned back in my chair, thinking what a great morning it was. But then, oh boy, everything changed. I heard a door slam bang, and I knew who it was before I even looked. It was Karen. She's my neighbor, 3 houses down, and she's the bossiest person in Oakwood Lane. She's the queen of the HOA, that's the Homeowners Association, the group that makes rules for our street. Karen loves rules more than anything, and she hates when anyone breaks them. Especially me. Especially Rusty. I turned my head, real slow, and there she was, storming out of her big white house. She had on this bright pink robe that flapped around her legs as she marched down her steps. Her blonde hair was all puffed up, like she'd just combed it a million times, and her face, wow, her face was redder than a big, ripe tomato. She looked mad. Really, really mad. She stopped on her porch for a second, staring at Rusty, then at me, her eyes all squinty and mean. I knew what was coming. I'd seen that look before. "Jake," she yelled, her voice sharp like a teacher scolding a kid. "Jake, control that mutt, or I'm calling 911. She waved her phone in the air like it was a sword or something. Her slippers slapped the ground as she started walking toward my yard, slap, 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 each step loud and angry. Rusty was still barking at the squirrel, woof. Woof, totally happy and not even noticing her. But Karen? She noticed him. Big time. I raised one eyebrow and looked at her. "Karen," I said, nice and calm, "it's a dog. He barks. Chill out." I didn't yell or anything. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, trying to keep things easy. Rusty's not a bad dog. He's not mean or scary. He's just loud sometimes, especially when squirrels are around. That's normal, right? Dogs bark. It's what they do. I thought maybe she'd get that, maybe she'd just go back inside and leave us alone. But nope. Not Karen. She doesn't chill out. Ever. Her face got even redder, if that's possible, and she stomped closer to my fence. "Chill out," she screeched, her voice so loud it made a bird fly out of a tree. "I will not chill out, Jake. That dog is a menace. A noisy, awful menace." She pointed at Rusty with her phone, shaking it like she was mad at the whole world. "I'm calling 911 right now. Right this second." I tilted my head and watched her. She pressed buttons on her phone, her fingers moving fast, and then she held it up to her ear. "Yes, hello, officer," she said, glaring at me like I'd done something terrible. "There's a disturbance on Oakwood Lane. A vicious animal. You need to come quick." Her words were fast and sharp, like little darts flying through the air. "Vicious. I almost laughed out loud. Rusty. Vicious. My big, goofy dog who once licked a burglar's hand instead of chasing him away. One time, a guy tried to sneak into our shed at night, and Rusty didn't even growl. He just wagged his tail and licked the guy's fingers until he ran off scared of all the slobber. That's Rusty. He's not vicious. He's a cuddly teddy bear with a loud bark. But Karen didn't care about that. She kept talking into her phone, her voice getting louder and louder. Yes, it's an emergency, she said. Hurry up. I couldn't help it, I smirked. Just a little. A tiny smile crept up on my face because this was so silly. Calling 911 over a dog barking? Really? I looked at Rusty, who was now sitting by the fence, panting and wagging his tail. He didn't look like an emergency. He looked like he was waiting for me to throw him a ball. But Karen was acting like he was some wild monster tearing up the street. It was nuts. She hung up the phone and crossed her arms, staring at me with those mean, squinty eyes. You'll see, Jake, she said, her voice all smug. The police will take care of this. They'll make you shut that dog up. She nodded to herself, like she'd already won some big fight. This is a peaceful neighborhood, and I'm keeping it that way. I took another sip of my coffee and shrugged. Okay, Karen, I said, real quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't yell back. I just sat there, rocking in my chair, watching her. Rusty barked again, woof. And chased the squirrel back across her lawn. Karen spun around, her robe flapping, and shouted, See? See what I mean? He's out of control. Out of control? I shook my head a little. Rusty was just being Rusty. He wasn't hurting anyone. He wasn't breaking anything. He was chasing a squirrel and barking because that's what dogs do when they're happy. But Karen didn't see it that way. To her, every woof was like a bomb going off in her perfect little world. She wanted everything quiet, everything neat, everything her way. And me and Rusty? We weren't her way. She marched back toward her house, still muttering to herself. The cops will fix this, she said, loud enough for me to hear. They'll come, and you'll be sorry. Her slippers slapped the ground again, slap, slap, slap as she climbed her steps and stood on her porch, staring at us. She looked so proud, like she'd just solved some huge problem. I didn't say anything. I just watched her, sipping my coffee, waiting to see what would happen next. But here's the thing, something felt different. I couldn't tell you why, not right then. It was just a feeling, like a tickle in the back of my brain. The air felt funny, like it was holding a secret. Rusty kept barking, the squirrel kept running, and Karen kept glaring, but there was something else going on. Something big. I didn't know what it was yet, and neither did she. She thought she was in charge, thought she'd called the cops and that was that. But she had no idea what was coming. Not a clue. Let me tell you more about Karen so you get why this was such a big deal. She's not just bossy, she's the bossiest. She's been the head of the HOA for years, and she loves it. She walks around Oakwood Lane with her clipboard, writing down every little thing she doesn't like. If your grass grows too tall, bam, she's at your door. If your kid leaves a toy in the yard, wham, you get a letter. She's got rules for everything. No loud noises after 8 p.m., she'd say. No messy yards. No fun. Okay, she didn't say that last one, but it sure felt like it. Everyone knows her. Mr. Thompson, the old guy next door, calls her the clipboard lady. Little Timmy across the street hides his bike when she's around. Even Mrs. Lopez, who's super nice, sighs when Karen walks by. Nobody likes her, but nobody fights her either. She's scary in that way adults can be scary, not with fists, but with words and glares. She makes you feel like you're in trouble even when you didn't do anything wrong. And me? I'm her favorite person to pick on. Ever since I moved here with Rusty, she's been on my case. That dog's too loud, she'd say every week. Keep him quiet, Jake. I'd just nod and say, sure, Karen, but Rusty's a dog. He barks. I can't tape his mouth shut. She didn't care, though. She'd glare at us from her porch, her arms crossed, her lips all tight like she'd sucked on a lemon. It was like she hated us just for existing. So when she called 911 that morning, I wasn't shocked. Mad. Maybe a little. Annoyed. For sure. But shocked? Nah. It's Karen. That's what she does. She loves being the boss, loves making a fuss. I figured the cops would show up, listen to her complain, then leave. Happens all the time with people like her, right? They'd see Rusty wagging his tail and say, "Ma'am, it's just a dog," and that'd be it. At least, that's what I thought. But that funny feeling in the air? It wouldn't go away. I rocked in my chair, watching Karen pace on her porch, her phone still in her hand. Rusty barked again, woof. Woof. And ran back to me, his tongue hanging out. I patted his head and said, "Good boy." He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, happy as can be. Karen shouted, "Quiet, you mutt," but Rusty didn't care. He just flopped down next to me, panting and grinning. I looked at her, then at the street, then back at her. Something was off. I couldn't figure it out, but it was there, like a shadow you can't quite see. Karen thought she'd won. She thought the cops were coming to back her up, to make me and Rusty stop. She stood there, all proud and loud, waiting for her big moment. But she didn't know what I didn't know either, that this wasn't going to end the way she planned. Not even close. The tension was building, like when you're blowing up a balloon and you know it's going to pop soon. Rusty's barks, Karen's yells, my quiet smirks, it was all mixing together into something bigger. I sipped my coffee again, the warm taste calming me down a little. Whatever was coming, I'd find out soon. And Karen? She'd find out too. She thought she was the queen of Oakwood Lane, but queens can fall. And this queen was about to trip over something she never saw coming. The minutes started ticking by, slow and steady, like the clock on my porch was counting down to something big. I was still sitting there, rocking in my chair, my coffee mug warm in my hands. The sun was shining bright, the birds were chirping, and everything seemed normal, well, almost normal. Rusty, my big goofy golden retriever, was done chasing that squirrel. He flopped down onto the grass in our yard, his fluffy golden fur shining in the light. He found a stick, a little twig with some leaves still on it, and started chewing on it like it was the best toy ever. Crunch, crunch, went the stick in his mouth. His tail wagged a little, slow and happy, and he looked like he didn't have a care in the world. Across the street, though, Karen was a totally different story. She was pacing back and forth in her driveway, her bright pink robe flapping around her legs. Her slippers made little slapping sounds on the pavement, slap, 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 as she walked. She was muttering to herself, saying stuff like rules and respect over and over. People need to follow the rules, she grumbled loud enough for me to hear. This street needs respect, and I'm gonna make sure it gets it. Her face was still red, maybe even redder than before, and her blonde hair bounced a little with every step. She looked like a volcano about to explode, all hot and angry. I watched her from my porch, sipping my coffee. It still tasted good, warm and sweet, just how I like it. I figured she'd called the cops, and they'd show up soon. That's what usually happens with people like Karen, right? She's one of those HOA Karens, those bossy neighbors who run the homeowners association and love telling everyone what to do. I'd seen it before, not just here but in stories my friends told me. They'd say, "Oh yeah, our HOA lady called the cops because my cat sat on her fence," or "she freaked out over a basketball hoop." It's always the same, lots of yelling, then the cops come, roll their eyes, and leave. So I thought that's what would happen today. The police would drive up, listen to Karen complain about Rusty's barking, look at my big happy dog chewing his stick, and say, "Ma'am, it's just a dog." Then they'd go. Easy peasy. Rusty barked once, woof, and rolled onto his back, wiggling in the grass like he was scratching an itch. I smiled at him. "You're silly, buddy," I said quiet like, just to him. Karen heard the bark, though, and spun around fast. "See," she shouted, pointing at Rusty with one hand while holding her phone with the other. "He's doing it again. That noise. It's awful." She waved her phone in the air like it was proof of something. I just shrugged and took another sip of coffee. She was mad, sure, but I wasn't worried. Not yet. But then, something weird caught my eye. I stopped rocking in my chair for a second and looked down the street. There, 2 houses down from mine, was a police car. It wasn't moving. It was just sitting there, parked nice and quiet by the curb. The lights on top weren't flashing, no red, no blue, nothing. It was all dark and still, like it didn't want anyone to notice it. I squinted my eyes, trying to see better. The sun was bright, so I had to scrunch up my face a little, but yep, it was definitely a cop car. White with black stripes, the kind you see in movies. But why was it already here? Karen had just called 911, hadn't she? The cops shouldn't be here yet. They should still be on their way, driving over with their sirens going wee-oh-oh, wee-oh-oh. So what was this car doing, just sitting there? I leaned forward in my chair, my coffee mug still in my hands, and stared at it. The windows of the car were dark, so I couldn't see inside. Were there cops in there? Were they looking at us? At me and Rusty? Or, at Karen? My brain started buzzing with questions, like bees flying around in my head. This was strange. Really strange. I looked back at Karen, who was still pacing her driveway, muttering and waving her phone. Hurry up already, she yelled into it, like she was mad they weren't here yet. I need you now. This dog is driving me crazy. She didn't see the police car. Not at all. She was too busy being loud and bossy to notice anything else. Her slippers kept slapping the ground, slap, 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 and her voice kept getting sharper. I told you, officer, it's an emergency, she said into her phone. A vicious animal. Right here on Oakwood Lane. She sounded so sure of herself, like she knew the cops would come running to save her from Rusty's big, goofy barks. But me? I wasn't so sure anymore. I leaned back in my chair again, slow and easy, and took a long sip of coffee. My eyes kept going back to that police car. It hadn't moved an inch. It was just sitting there, quiet as a mouse, 2 houses down. Why? Why were they already here? Did they get a call before Karen's? Was something else going on? A little spark of curiosity lit up inside me, like when you find a puzzle piece that doesn't fit anywhere yet. I didn't know what it meant, but I wanted to find out. Rusty rolled over and stood up, shaking the grass off his fur. Woof, he barked again, then trotted over to me. His big paws thumped the porch steps as he climbed up, and he plopped down next to my chair. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, his tongue hanging out, all happy and panting. I reached down and scratched his head. Good boy, I said, smiling. He wagged his tail, thump, thump, thump against the porch floor. Karen heard it and yelled, quiet, you mutt, but Rusty didn't care. He just kept wagging and chewing his stick. I glanced at Karen again. She was still pacing, still talking into her phone. Yes, yes, I'm waiting, she snapped. Where are you? This is ridiculous. Her voice was loud, but now that I was listening close, I noticed something. It wasn't just mad anymore. It was nervous. Just a tiny bit, like a hiccup in her words. Her pacing got faster, slap, 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 and her free hand was twisting the edge of her robe. Twist, twist, twist. She kept looking down the street, but not at the police car. She was looking the other way, like she expected the cops to come from somewhere else. That's when my curiosity grew bigger. Why did she sound nervous? Karen never sounded nervous. She was always loud and sure, like she owned the whole world. But now, her voice had this little shake in it, like she wasn't as tough as she wanted me to think. And that police car, why wasn't it moving? Were the cops watching her? Did they know something I didn't? Did she know something I didn't? I rocked my chair a little, back and forth, thinking hard. The air felt different now, like it was holding its breath. Rusty barked again, woof. And Karen spun around so fast her robe almost flew open. Jake, she shouted, pointing at me. Make him stop. The cops are coming, and they'll deal with you. She nodded hard, like she was trying to convince herself. You'll see. You and that dog are in big trouble. I didn't say anything. I just smirked a little, that tiny smile creeping up again. Trouble? Me and Rusty? Nah. Rusty was chewing his stick, happy as can be, and I was just sitting here with my coffee. We weren't the ones in trouble. But Karen? Maybe she was. That police car wasn't here for no reason. Something was up, and I was starting to feel it in my bones. Let me tell you more about that moment so you can see it too. Oakwood Lane was quiet, except for Karen's yelling and Rusty's barks. The houses all looked pretty in the sun, yellow ones, green ones, white ones, all in a neat row. The grass was green, the sky was blue, and a little breeze was blowing, making the leaves wiggle on the trees. It was a perfect day, the kind where you want to run outside and play. But right then, it didn't feel perfect. It felt sneaky. Like a secret was hiding somewhere, waiting to pop out. I looked at the police car again, squinting harder. It was parked in front of Mrs. Lopez's house. She's a quiet lady who lives 2 doors down. Her house is small and yellow, with flowers in the front. She's nice, always waves at me and Rusty when we walk by. Did the cops come to see her? No, that didn't make sense. She's too shy to cause trouble. So why were they there? I couldn't see anyone inside the car, but I knew they had to be watching. Watching what? Watching who? Karen kept pacing, her slippers slapping faster now. Slap, 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 slap. They better get here soon, she muttered. I'm tired of this nonsense. She sounded mad, but that nervous shake in her voice was still there. I tilted my head and listened close. Yep, it was real. She was worried about something, even if she didn't want me to know it. Her hand kept twisting her robe, twist, 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 like she couldn't keep still. Rusty barked again, woof, woof, and ran down the porch steps, chasing a leaf that blew across the yard. Karen shouted, "Stop that," but he didn't listen. He grabbed the leaf in his mouth and shook it like it was a toy. I laughed, a little chuckle, and sipped my coffee. Karen glared at me, her eyes all squinty again. You think this is funny, Jake, she said, her voice sharp. You won't be laughing when the cops get here. I shrugged. Maybe, I said, real calm. We'll see. I didn't tell her about the police car. I didn't say, hey, Karen, they're already here. Nope. I kept that to myself, like a little secret just for me. I wanted to see what happened next. I wanted to know why that car was sitting there, quiet and still, like a cat waiting to pounce. The minutes kept ticking by, and Karen kept pacing. Slap, slap, slap. Twist, twist, twist. Hurry up, she yelled into her phone again. I need you now. Her voice was loud, but that nervous shake was getting bigger. I could hear it plain as day now. She wasn't just mad, she was scared. Scared of what? The cops? Me? Rusty? Something else? I rocked my chair some more, back and forth, back and forth. The coffee was still warm, the sun was still bright, and Rusty was still playing. But that police car? It didn't move. Not an inch. It just sat there, watching, waiting. And me? I was waiting too. That spark of curiosity was growing into a little fire now. Why were they here? What didn't I know? What didn't Karen know? Something was coming. Something big. I could feel it, like when you're about to open a door and you don't know what's on the other side. Karen thought she was in charge, thought she'd called the cops and they'd fix everything her way. But that car, that sneaky, quiet car, told me she was wrong. She had no idea what was about to happen. And honestly, neither did I. But I was ready to find out. Everything was quiet for a second, like the whole world held its breath. I was sitting on my porch, rocking in my chair, my coffee mug warm in my hands. Rusty, my big fluffy golden retriever, was lying next to me, chewing on a stick he'd found in the yard. Across the street, Karen was pacing her driveway, muttering into her phone about how the cops needed to hurry up and stop Rusty's barking. Her bright pink robe flapped around her legs, and her face was redder than a fire truck. She thought she was in charge, like always. She thought she'd called the police, and they'd come running to help her boss me around. But oh boy, was she wrong. Suddenly, bam, the doors of that police car swung open. You know, the one I'd seen parked 2 houses down, all quiet and sneaky? Yeah, that one. It had been sitting there for a while, lights off, just waiting. I'd been staring at it, wondering why it was there, why it hadn't moved. And now, here it was, coming to life. The doors opened fast, like in a movie, and two officers stepped out. They weren't little guys, these were big, tall policemen with shiny badges on their dark blue uniforms. Their hats sat straight on their heads, and their faces looked serious, like they meant business. I stopped rocking my chair and sat up a little, my eyes wide. Rusty stopped chewing his stick and tilted his head, his big brown eyes blinking at the car. The officers didn't look at me. They didn't look at Rusty. They didn't run toward my yard like I thought they might. Nope. They turned the other way straight toward Karen's house. Their boots thumped on the pavement, thump, thump, thump as they walked, slow and steady, right up her driveway. Karen was still talking on her phone, her voice loud and sharp. "Yes, officer, you need to," she started, but then she saw them. Her mouth stopped moving mid-sentence, like someone hit a pause button. Her jaw dropped open, hanging there like a fish out of water. Her phone slipped from her hand, plink, and hit the pavement with a little clatter. It bounced once, then landed face down next to her slipper. She didn't even try to pick it up. She just stood there, staring at the officers, her eyes getting bigger and bigger. What are you doing?" she stammered, her voice all shaky now. She took a step back, then another, her slippers sliding on the ground, scrape, scrape. Her face wasn't red anymore. It was turning pale, like she'd seen a ghost. The officers kept walking toward her, calm as could be. One of them, he had a mustache and a deep voice, spoke up. "Ma'am," he said, nice and firm, "we've been waiting for you." Waiting for her? My ears perked up like Rusty's when he hears a squirrel. What did that mean? The other officer, a lady with short brown hair, nodded. "Mind if we step inside?" she said, holding up her hand like she was asking permission. "We've got a warrant." "A warrant?" I almost dropped my coffee mug right there. It wobbled in my hands, and a little splash of coffee dripped onto my knee. I didn't even care, I was too busy staring. Rusty tilted his head the other way, his stick falling out of his mouth. He looked at me like, "Jake, what's a warrant?" I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My brain was spinning too fast. Karen's face went from pale to pure white, like all the color ran away and hid. "A warrant," she squeaked, her voice tiny and high, like a mouse caught in a trap. "For what?" She backed up more, bumping into her own front steps, thud, and almost falling over. Her pink robe flapped open a little, but she didn't fix it. She was too busy freaking out. Her hands waved in the air, like she didn't know what to do with them. The mustache officer stayed calm. He didn't yell or anything. He just looked at her with those serious eyes and said, "Embezzlement, ma'am." Embezzlement. I didn't know that word super well, but I'd heard it before, maybe on TV. It means stealing money, sneaky like, from a place you're not supposed to. My eyes got even wider. The lady officer held up a piece of paper, all white and official looking, with black writing on it. "Turns out the HOA funds have been disappearing," she said, her voice steady. "And they all lead back to you." Whoa. Whoa. My jaw dropped so far it practically hit the porch floor. Karen. Stealing money? From the HOA? The Homeowners Association, the group she bossed around like a queen? My brain felt like it was doing cartwheels. Rusty barked once, woof, and stood up, his tail wagging slow, like he was confused but excited. I put my coffee mug down on the little table next to me because my hands were shaking now. This was wild. Karen, the lady who yelled at me for Rusty's barking, the lady who fined Mr. Thompson for his tall grass, the lady who told little Timmy he couldn't ride his bike too fast, had been taking money. Money that wasn't hers. I couldn't believe it. She was always so mean about rules, always acting like she was perfect. "Trim those hedges, or you'll pay," she'd snap at people. "No loud noises, or I'll fine you." And now, here were the cops saying she was the one breaking rules, big ones. The whole street went silent. Like, super silent. The birds stopped chirping. The breeze stopped blowing. Even Rusty stopped barking. It was just me, Rusty, Karen, and the two officers standing there in her driveway. Her phone lay on the ground, forgotten. Her hands were shaking now, and her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. What?" she said again, softer this time. That's crazy. I didn't steal anything." Her voice was all wobbly, like she was about to cry. The mustache officer shook his head a little. "We've got proof, ma'am," he said. "Bank records. Papers. It all points to you." The lady officer nodded again. "We've been watching for a while," she said. "Today's the day we had to come talk to you." "Watching for a while?" My head snapped back to that police car. That's why it was already here. They weren't waiting for Karen's 911 call about Rusty. They didn't care about my dog barking. They were here for her before she even picked up her phone. My coffee was cold now, but I didn't care. I leaned forward in my chair, my eyes glued to the scene. This was too good. Way too good. Karen's legs wobbled, and she grabbed the railing on her steps to stay up. "No, no, no," she said, shaking her head fast. "You've got it wrong. I'm the good one. I keep this street perfect." She pointed at me, her finger shaking. "He's the problem. Him and that noisy dog." The officers didn't even look at me. They kept their eyes on her, calm and steady, like they'd heard this kind of thing before. "Ma'am," the mustache officer said, "this isn't about a dog. It's about the money. Thousands of dollars from the HOA gone. And it's all tied to you. Thousands of dollars." My mouth fell open again. "That's a lot of money. Like, enough to buy 1,000,000 candy bars or a big fancy bike or something. And Karen took it?" I thought back to all the times she'd find people. $5 here for a messy yard. $10 there for a loud radio. Little fines all the time, adding up. Did she keep that money for herself? Was that part of it? My brain was buzzing like a beehive. Karen the HOA tyrant, the queen of rules, wasn't just bossy. She was sneaky. She was a thief. Rusty barked again, woof. Woof. And ran down the porch steps, chasing a leaf that blew by. Karen jumped like she'd been shocked. "See," she yelled, her voice cracking. "That dog. That's why I called you." The lady officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am," she said, "we didn't come because of a dog. We came because of you." Karen's face froze, like she didn't know what to say. I couldn't help it, I laughed. Just a little chuckle at first, then a bigger one. This was nuts. Karen thought she'd called the cops on me and Rusty, but they were already here for her. My coffee mug tipped over on the table, oops, but I didn't care. I stood up, leaning on the porch railing, watching it all unfold. Rusty ran back to me, his tail wagging like crazy, and sat down next to my feet. He looked up at me, panting, like he was saying, "What's so funny, Jake?" Karen's eyes darted around, like she was looking for a way out. "This is a mistake," she said, louder now. "I didn't do anything. You can't prove it?" But the mustache officer held up that paper again. "We can," he said. "We've got everything we need right here." He stepped closer, and the lady officer did too. "Now, ma'am, let's go inside. We need to talk." Karen shook her head so fast her hair flew around. "No. No way," she shouted. "I'm not going anywhere." She backed up more, tripping over her own slippers thump, and landing on her steps. She scrambled up, her robe all messy now, and pointed at me again. "Arrest him. Arrest that dog. Not me." The officers didn't budge. They didn't even glance my way. "Ma'am," the lady officer said, real calm, "we're not here for anyone else. Just you." Karen's hands dropped to her sides, and she stared at them, her breath coming out fast and loud. She looked like a balloon that just got popped, all the air gone, all the fight leaking out. I scratched Rusty's head, my grin getting bigger. "Well, buddy," I whispered to him, "looks like we're not the bad guys today." He barked woof. And licked my hand. The street was still silent, but now I could hear whispers. Neighbors were peeking out their windows, curtains moving just a little. Mr. Thompson's face popped up next door, his eyes wide. Little Timmy's mom opened her door a crack, watching. Everyone was seeing this. Everyone was hearing it. Karen, the big, bossy Karen who fined people for untrimmed hedges, who yelled at kids for playing too loud, who acted like she owned Oakwood Lane, was in trouble. Big trouble. Not me. Not Rusty. Her. And the cops? They'd been waiting for her all along. This wasn't about barking. This was about stealing. This was about her getting caught. I sat back down in my chair, picked up my spilled coffee mug, and leaned back. The officers stepped closer to Karen, their boots thumping again, thump, thump, thump. She was trapped, and she knew it. Her perfect little world, the one where she told everyone what to do, was falling apart right in front of her. And me? I couldn't stop smiling. This was too good. Way too good. So there we were, standing on my porch, me and Rusty, my big goofy golden retriever. The police had just dropped the biggest surprise ever. Karen, the mean HOA queen, was a thief. She'd been stealing money from the homeowners association, and the cops had caught her red-handed. Her face was white as a ghost, her pink robe all messy, and she was freaking out big time. I was still holding my coffee mug, even though it was empty now, and Rusty was wagging his tail next to me, his stick lying forgotten on the porch floor. Karen wasn't going down easy, though. Oh no. She started arguing, flapping her arms like a chicken that just got scared out of its coop. "This is outrageous," she yelled, her voice all high and squeaky. "I'm the victim here. Me. Not him." She pointed at me with a shaky finger, her blonde hair bouncing all wild. "That dog, he's the problem. Arrest him." She stomped her foot, thump, and her slipper almost fell off. She looked so mad, but also kind of funny, like a cartoon character who doesn't know they've already lost. The two officers, the mustache guy and the lady with short hair, just stood there, calm as can be. They didn't yell back. They didn't even blink. The mustache officer shook his head a little, like he'd heard this a million times before. "Ma'am," he said, nice and firm, "we're not here for the dog. We're here for you." The lady officer nodded and held up that paper again, the warrant. "You need to come with us," she said. "Let's go inside and talk." Karen's eyes got huge, like two big marbles popping out of her head. "No," she shouted, flapping her arms even more. "No way. This is my house. You can't make me." She backed up toward her front door, tripping over her steps again, thud, and catching herself on the railing. Her robe flapped open, showing her polka dot pajamas underneath, but she didn't care. She was too busy trying to argue her way out of this mess. But the officers? They weren't buying it. Not one bit. The mustache guy stepped closer, thump, thumped his boots loud on her driveway. "Ma'am," he said, "we've got proof. You took the money. It's over." The lady officer moved too, standing right next to him. "Let's not make this harder," she said, her voice soft but strong. Karen looked at them, then at me, then back at them. Her mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out this time. I scratched Rusty's head and whispered, "She's in big trouble, huh, buddy?" He barked once, woof, and licked my hand, his tail wagging faster. I couldn't help but grin. Karen thought she was the boss of everything, but now she was caught, and there was no way out. The officers didn't wait anymore. They walked right up to her, slow and steady. The mustache guy took her arm, not hard, just gentle like, and said, "Come on, ma'am. Inside first." Karen tried to pull away, flapping her arms one last time. "This is a mistake," she squeaked. "I'm innocent." But they didn't let go. They turned her around and walked her up her steps, thump, 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 into her big white house. The door closed behind them with a little click, and then it was quiet again. I sat back down in my rocking chair, my empty coffee mug in my lap. Rusty flopped down next to me, panting and happy. "What's gonna happen now?" I said to him, even though he couldn't answer. He just looked up at me with those big brown eyes, like he was saying, "I don't know, Jake, but it's exciting." I laughed and patted his head again. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "Real exciting." The street was super quiet now, but I could feel eyes watching. Neighbors were peeking out from behind their curtains, little shadows moving here and there. Mr. Thompson next door pushed his curtain aside, his old face all wrinkled and surprised. Little Timmy's mom opened her door just a crack, her eyes big and curious. Even Mrs. Lopez, 2 houses down, was looking out her window, her hands holding the edge of her yellow curtains. Everyone wanted to see what was happening to Karen, the mean lady who'd bossed them around for years. A few minutes went by, tick, 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 and then the door to Karen's house opened again. Out she came, but she didn't look like the queen anymore. Nope. Her hands were behind her back, and I saw why the officers had put handcuffs on her. Shiny silver handcuffs, clicking around her wrists, holding her arms tight. Her pink robe was flapping in the breeze, all messy and loose, and her hair was sticking out every which way. She didn't look mad now. She looked scared, her eyes darting around like she wanted to run but couldn't. The mustache officer held her arm, guiding her down the steps. Thump, thump, thump. The lady officer walked behind, carrying that warrant paper and a little black bag. "Let's go, ma'am," the mustache guy said, his voice still calm. Karen shook her head, her voice all wobbly. "This isn't fair," she said. "I didn't do anything wrong." But the officers kept walking her toward the police car, slow and steady, like they knew she couldn't talk her way out of this. I stood up again, leaning on my porch railing to watch. Rusty barked woof, woof, and ran to the edge of the porch, his tail wagging like crazy. "Good boy," I said, grinning big. "You barked her right into jail, didn't you?" He looked at me and barked again, like he was saying, "Yep, Jake. I did it." I laughed out loud this time, a big happy laugh that echoed down the street. The neighbors were whispering now, little giggles floating out from behind the curtains. "She's in handcuffs," I heard Mr. Thompson say, his voice all shaky with surprise. "Karen's going to jail." Little Timmy's mom giggled too, covering her mouth with her hand. Even Mrs. Lopez smiled a tiny bit, her eyes twinkling like she couldn't believe it. Everyone was watching as the officers marched Karen to the squad car, that white car with black stripes that had been sitting there all along. The lady officer opened the back door creak and the mustache guy helped Karen in. She didn't want to go, though. She twisted around, her robe flapping more. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I'm the boss here. I make the rules." But the mustache guy just said, "Not anymore, ma'am," and gently pushed her into the car. She slid onto the seat, her hands still cuffed behind her, and glared out the window. Her eyes found me, and she stared hard, like she could still find me from inside the car, like she could write me a ticket with her mean look. I waved at her, just a little wave, and grinned even bigger. "Bye, Karen," I said, loud enough for her to hear. Rusty barked again, woof. Like he was saying goodbye too. The officers looked at me, and the mustache guy tipped his hat, just a little nod. The lady officer smiled a tiny bit, like she thought it was funny. Then they got in the front of the car. Thump, thump, the doors closed, and the engine started with a low rumble. The police car pulled away from the curb, slow and smooth, driving down Oakwood Lane. Karen's face was pressed against the window, her glare still on me, but she couldn't do anything now. The car turned the corner, and just like that, she was gone. The street went quiet again, but it felt different this time. Lighter. Freer. Like a big, heavy cloud had floated away, and the sun was shining even brighter. I sat back down, my grin so big it hurt my cheeks. "Well, Rusty," I said, patting his head, "we did it." He barked woof. And licked my hand, his tail thumping the porch floor. Thump, thump, thump. The neighbors started coming out now, slow at first. Mr. Thompson hobbled onto his porch with his cane, shaking his head and laughing. "Never thought I'd see the day," he called to me. Little Timmy ran out with his mom, jumping up and down. "She's gone, Jake," he yelled. "No more mean lady." Even Mrs. Lopez stepped outside, her smile bigger than I'd ever seen it. The rest of that day was happy and loud. Kids rode their bikes down the street, laughing and shouting. Dogs barked, not just Rusty, but other dogs too, like they knew something good had happened. People waved at me and Rusty, giving us big thumbs up. "Good job, Jake," they'd say. "Rusty's the hero." I just waved back, feeling all warm and fuzzy inside. Karen was gone, and Oakwood Lane was ours again. By Monday, things got even better. I was sitting on my porch with a new cup of coffee, yum, fresh and hot, when my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA. I opened it up, and oh boy, it was good news. "Dear Oakwood Lane residents," it said. "Karen is no longer part of the HOA. She's been removed because of stealing money. We're tracking down the missing funds, thousands of dollars, and we'll get it back. New rules are coming soon, fair ones this time. Thank you for your patience." I read it twice, just to make sure it was real. Thousands of dollars. Karen had taken so much, but now she was caught, and the money was coming back. New rules, fair ones, meant no more silly fines for tall grass or barking dogs. I looked at Rusty, who was chasing a squirrel across the yard again. Woof. Woof, he barked, his tail wagging like a fan. You hear that, buddy? I said. You can bark all you want now. He ran back to me, jumping up with his big paws thump, and licked my face. I laughed and hugged him tight. The street felt different after that. Lighter, like I said before. Freer, like we could all breathe easy again. Kids played louder, dogs ran around, and neighbors smiled more. No more Karen stomping around with her clipboard. No more mean glares or silly tickets. Oakwood Lane was happy again, and Rusty? He was the king of it all. He barked at squirrels every day, woof. Woof. Chasing them up trees and across lawns, and nobody cared. Nobody told him to stop. He was free, and so were we. I rocked in my chair, sipping my coffee, watching Rusty play. The sun was warm, the breeze was soft, and everything was good. Karen was gone off to jail or somewhere far away, and justice was served. She thought she could boss us forever, but she was wrong. Rusty's barks had won, and I couldn't have been prouder. I rocked in my chair, sipping my coffee, watching Rusty play. The sun was warm, the breeze was soft, and everything was good. Karen was gone off to jail or somewhere far away, and justice was served. She thought she could boss us forever, but she was wrong. Rusty's barks had won, and I couldn't have been prouder. The next few days were like a party on Oakwood Lane. Not a real party with cake and balloons, though that would have been fun, but the kind where everyone's just happy to be outside. The sun kept shining, bright and yellow in the sky, and the birds chirped louder than ever, like they were singing a victory song. Rusty ran around the yard every morning, chasing squirrels like it was his job. Woof. Woof, he'd bark, his tail wagging so fast it looked like a blurry fan. He'd zoom to the big oak tree, jump up with his paws thump, and bark some more. The squirrels would scamper up the branches, peeking down at him like, "HA. Can't catch us." But Rusty didn't care. He was having the time of his life. I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, watching him and smiling. "Go get him, buddy," I'd say, and he'd look back at me with those big brown eyes, his tongue hanging out, like he was saying, "I'm the king, Jake." And he was. King Rusty of Oakwood Lane. No more Karen to yell at him. No more mean looks or silly rules. Just him, the squirrels, and a whole street full of freedom. The neighbors kept coming out more and more. Mr. Thompson, the old guy next door, started sitting on his porch too. He'd bring out his little radio, crackle, crackle, and play soft music that floated across the yards. "Nice day, huh, Jake?" he'd call over, leaning on his cane. "Real nice now that she's gone." He'd laugh, a big wheezy laugh, and I'd laugh back. "Yep, Mr. Thompson," I'd say. "Real nice." Rusty would bark at him, "Woof." And Mr. Thompson would wave. "Good dog," he'd say. "You scared her off, didn't you?" I'd nod and pat Rusty's head. "Sure did," I'd say, grinning. Little Timmy from across the street was out all the time now. He'd ride his bike up and down the sidewalk, zoom, zoom, his red helmet bouncing as he went. "No more mean lady," he'd yell every time he passed my house. "Rusty's the best." His mom would stand by their door, smiling and waving at me. "Thanks, Jake," she'd call. "You and Rusty made this place fun again." I'd wave back and say, "No problem." It wasn't really me who did it, though. It was Rusty and the cops, of course. But I didn't mind taking a little credit. It felt good. Even Mrs. Lopez, the quiet lady 2 houses down, started coming outside more. She'd water her flowers, bright red and yellow ones that popped against her little yellow house, and hum a little song. One day, she walked over to my fence, her watering can dripping drip, drip on the grass. "Jake," she said, her voice soft, "I'm so glad she's gone. She used to tell me my flowers were too messy." She shook her head, her gray hair bouncing a little. "Can you believe that? Too messy." I laughed and said, "That's Karen for you. Everything had to be her way." Mrs. Lopez smiled, bigger than I'd ever seen. "Not anymore," she said. Now my flowers can grow however they want. She turned back to her yard, humming again, and I watched her go, feeling all warm inside. Rusty barked woof, woof, and ran over to the fence to say hi to her. She giggled and reached over to pet him. Good boy, Rusty, she said. You're a hero. He wagged his tail thump, 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 and licked her hand. She laughed again, then went back to her flowers. I sipped my coffee and thought, yep, he's a hero all right. My big, goofy dog had helped change everything, just by being himself. The email from the HOA stayed on my phone, and I'd read it again sometimes, just to feel that happy zap all over. Karen is gone, it said. The missing money is being tracked. New rules are coming, fair ones. Every time I saw those words, I'd smile. Thousands of dollars she'd taken, so much. Money that was supposed to fix the park swings or paint the street signs. Money from all of us, little fines here and there, adding up over years. And she'd kept it for herself, sneaky as a fox. But not anymore. The cops had her, and the HOA was fixing it. Justice, big time. By Tuesday, people started talking more about what happened. I'd walk Rusty down the street, his leash jingling, his paws thumping, and neighbors would stop me to chat. Jake, they'd say, all excited. Did you hear? Karen's in jail. I'd nod and say, yep, saw it myself. They'd laugh and shake their heads. She fined me for my mailbox being crooked, said Mr. Peters from the greenhouse. And me for my dog digging a hole, said Mrs. Carter from the corner. She was mean to everyone. We'd all laugh, and Rusty would bark woof. Like he was agreeing. It was like the whole street was waking up from a grumpy dream, and now we could laugh about it. One day, little Timmy ran up to me while I was walking Rusty. His bike screeched to a stop, skrrr, and he hopped off, his helmet crooked. Jake, he said, bouncing on his toes. Is it true the cops took her away because Rusty barked? His eyes were big and shiny, like he thought Rusty was a superhero. I chuckled and said, not exactly, Timmy. She was stealing money. But Rusty's barking made her mad enough to call the cops, and that's when they got her. Timmy's mouth made a big O, and he looked at Rusty like he was magic. Cool, he said. Rusty's awesome. He reached down and petted Rusty's fluffy head. Rusty licked his hand, slurp, and Timmy giggled. You're the best dog ever, he said, then hopped back on his bike and zoomed off, zoom, zoom, yelling, Rusty rules. I laughed and kept walking, Rusty trotting beside me. You're famous now, buddy, I said. He barked woof. And chased a leaf that blew by, his tail wagging like crazy. Famous or not, he was still my silly dog, and I loved him more than ever. By Wednesday, the street started looking different too. People weren't scared to leave stuff out anymore. Mr. Thompson put a little birdhouse on his porch, tap, 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 he'd hammered it himself. Mrs. Carter let her dog dig in the yard again, little dirt piles popping up. Little Timmy's bike stayed on the sidewalk all day, not locked away. Even I left Rusty's ball in the yard overnight, bright red against the green grass, and nobody cared. No more Karen to march around with her clipboard, saying, that's against the rules. It was like we'd all been holding our breath, and now we could let it out, phew, and just live. Thursday morning, I got another email from the HOA. I was eating cereal, crunch, crunch, when my phone buzzed. Update, it said. We've found some of the money Karen took. More is coming. New leaders are picked, nice ones. Fair rules start next week. I put my spoon down and read it again. Nice leaders. Fair rules. That sounded perfect. I looked at Rusty, who was chewing his breakfast kibble, munch, munch, in his bowl by the door. Hear that, buddy? I said. No more mean rules. He barked woof. And ran over to me, jumping up with his paws thump, on my lap. I hugged him tight, his fur soft against my face. We won, Rusty, I said. We really won. Friday was the best day yet. The sun was extra bright, the sky extra blue. I took Rusty for a long walk all the way to the little park at the end of Oakwood Lane. His leash jingled, jingle, jingle, and his tail wagged the whole way. The park had swings and a slide, all rusty and old, but the email said they'd fix it soon with the money Karen stole. I let Rusty off his leash, click, and he ran free, barking at birds, woof, woof. and rolling in the grass. Kids were there too, swinging and shouting, their voices loud and happy. "Hi, Rusty," they'd yell, and he'd bark back, like he was saying hi too. I sat on a bench, watching him, my coffee in a travel mug, still warm. The breeze blew soft, rustling the trees swish, swish, and I felt so good. No more Karen. No more fines. Just me, Rusty, and a happy street. He ran back to me, panting and grinning, and flopped down at my feet, thump, his tongue out. "You're the king, Rusty," I said, scratching his ears. "King of Oakwood Lane." He barked woof. And rolled over, his paws in the air, like he was saying, "Yep, that's me." The weekend came, and it kept getting better. Neighbors had a little picnic in the park, no big plan, just everyone bringing snacks. I brought cookies, chocolate chip, all gooey, and Rusty brought his ball. We sat on blankets, eating and laughing, while Rusty chased his ball thump, thump across the grass. "To no more Karen," Mr. Thompson said, holding up his lemonade. "To Rusty," Timmy shouted, holding up his juice. We all cheered yay, and Rusty barked woof. Woof. Like he was cheering too. By Sunday, I knew it was real. Oakwood Lane was free. Rusty barked at squirrels every day, woof. Woof. And nobody stopped him. The street was loud again, kids playing, dogs barking, music floating, but it was a good loud. A happy loud. Karen was gone, justice was served, and we were all better for it. I rocked on my porch, coffee in hand, watching Rusty rule the yard. Life was good, really, really good. So here's the thing, friends, sometimes the loudest complainers like Karen are hiding the biggest secrets. Yep, it's true. Karen thought she could boss everyone around on Oakwood Lane. She'd stomp around with her clipboard, yelling at me about Rusty's barking, telling Mr. Thompson his grass was too tall, and scaring little Timmy about his bike. "Rules," she'd shout. "Respect." She acted like she was the queen of everything, like nobody could touch her. But guess what? She didn't see the truth sneaking up behind her, quiet as a mouse, ready to surprise her big time. Life's funny like that, isn't it? You think you know who's in charge, who's the loudest, who's the toughest. But sometimes, the ones who judge the most, the ones who point fingers and make a fuss, are the ones hiding something sneaky. Karen was like that. She'd glare at Rusty, woof. Woof. And shake her phone at me, saying, "I'm calling the cops." She thought she'd win, thought she'd make us all quiet down and follow her silly rules. But while she was yelling and pacing, the real story was waiting in that police car 2 houses down, lights off, sneaky and still. She didn't know the cops were there for her, not for Rusty. She didn't know her big secret was about to spill out like juice from a tipped-over cup. And when it did, oh boy, it was wild. Her face went white, her phone fell clatter, and she flapped her arms like a chicken caught in a rainstorm. "This is outrageous," she squeaked, but the officers didn't care. They had proof, papers and bank stuff showing she'd stolen money from the HOA. Thousands of dollars. Money that was supposed to fix the park or paint the street signs. She'd been sneaky, taking it bit by bit, thinking nobody would notice. But somebody did. The truth crept up, slow and quiet, until bam, it grabbed her. And down she went, right into those handcuffs, her pink robe flapping as they marched her away. That's the funny part about life, you see. The people who act the biggest, who shout the loudest, might just be the ones who fall the hardest. Karen judged everyone, me, Rusty, the neighbors, like she was perfect. But she wasn't. She was hiding something big, and when it came out, she didn't look so tough anymore. She looked small, scared, and silly, sitting in that police car, glaring out the window like she could still boss me around. But she couldn't. Not anymore. The truth won, and it was awesome. I sat on my porch after she was gone, rocking in my chair, sipping my coffee. Rusty was next to me, chewing a stick, crunch, crunch, his tail wagging slow and happy. The sun was warm, the breeze was soft, and Oakwood Lane felt different. Lighter. Freer. No more Karen stomping around, no more mean rules. Just me, my dog, and a street full of happy people. And I started thinking, really thinking about what this all meant. See, Rusty didn't do anything special. He just barked woof. Woof. Like he always does. He chased squirrels, wagged his tail, and licked my hand. He was just being a dog, a goofy, happy dog. But that barking? It set everything off. It made Karen so mad she called the cops, and that's when her secret came out. Rusty didn't know he was helping, he didn't plan it or anything. He was just himself. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Being yourself can shake things up, even if you don't mean to. Karen thought she was the top dog, the big boss. She thought she could push us all around forever. But the truth? It's stronger than any bossy lady with a clipboard. It's sneaky, quiet, and patient. It waits until the right moment, then pow, it shows up and changes everything. Karen didn't see it coming, but it came anyway. And when it did, it wasn't just her who lost. It was all the mean stuff she stood for, judging people, making silly rules, acting like she was better. That all fell down too, and we got our street back. So what's the lesson here? I think it's this: don't be a Karen. Don't judge people too quick or yell about little things like barking dogs or tall grass. Because maybe, just maybe, the ones who complain the loudest are hiding something. And maybe the quiet ones like Rusty, or even me sitting on my porch, have more power than you think. Life's got a way of flipping things around, showing you that the underdog can win. And sometimes, that underdog is an actual dog with a big, goofy bark. I looked at Rusty, his golden fur shining in the sun, and smiled. "You're the real winner, buddy," I said. He barked woof. And rolled over, his paws in the air, like he was saying, "Yep, Jake. I'm the king." I laughed and scratched his belly. He didn't know he'd helped catch a thief. He didn't know he'd made Oakwood Lane free again. He was just Rusty, my best friend, doing what he loves. And that was enough. What do you think, huh? Have you ever met a Karen who got what was coming to her? Maybe a bossy kid at school who acted big but got caught sneaking candy? Or a grumpy grown-up who yelled a lot but tripped over their own mess? I bet you have. Life's full of Karens, big and small, and sometimes they fall just like she did. Tell me about it below, I'd love to hear your stories. And stick around, because I've got more tales where the little guy or the little dog wins the day. It's the best kind of story, don't you think? Let's talk about that for a minute. Think about your own street, your own school, your own little world. Is there someone loud and bossy who thinks they're in charge? Maybe they tell you what to do, or they're mean about silly stuff like how you play or what you say. They might seem big and scary, like Karen with her clipboard and her mean glare. But here's a secret: they're not as strong as they look. Nope. The truth is stronger. Being yourself is stronger. And sometimes, all it takes is a little bark or a little giggle to shake things up. Rusty didn't fight Karen with claws or teeth. He didn't yell back or make a plan. He just barked woof. Woof. Because that's what dogs do. And me? I just sat there, sipping my coffee, letting her yell. I didn't have to fight either. The truth did all the work, sneaking up behind her like a shadow she didn't see. That's the cool thing about life. You don't always have to be loud or tough to win. Sometimes, you just have to be you, and the rest falls into place. Karen's gone now, off in that police car, and Oakwood Lane is ours again. Kids ride bikes, zoom, zoom, dogs bark, birds sing, and the sun shines brighter. It's like the street woke up from a grumpy nap, and now it's smiling. Rusty's the king, chasing squirrels every day, woof. Woof. And nobody stops him. Mr. Thompson plays his radio, crackle, crackle. Mrs. Lopez waters her flowers, drip, drip, and little Timmy zooms by, yelling, "Rusty rules." It's happy. It's free. And it's all because the loudest complainer fell, and the quiet truth won. So here's what I want you to remember, okay? Next time someone's bossy or mean, don't be scared. Don't think they're too big to beat. They might be hiding something, just like Karen was. And you? You've got power, even if you're quiet, even if you're small. Maybe you've got a goofy laugh, or a silly dance, or a big idea nobody's heard yet. That's your bark, your woof. And it's stronger than you think. Use it. Be you. And watch how life flips things around, just like it did for us. I'll never forget that day: the police car, the handcuffs, Karen's flapping robe. It was wild, funny, and a little crazy. But mostly, it was good. It showed me that the loudest voices don't always win. Sometimes, it's the quiet ones, the ones who just keep going, like Rusty chasing squirrels, who make the biggest difference. And when the truth comes out, it's like sunshine after a storm, bright, warm, and perfect. What about you? Got a story where the little guy won? Maybe a time when you stood up, or your pet did something awesome. Tell me below, I'm all ears. And don't go anywhere, because there's more fun coming. Stories where underdogs and maybe actual dogs come out on top are my favorite, and I bet they're yours too. Let's keep the good vibes going, okay? Rusty says woof to that.